Charles and Ned together. Pray, Tim, pray now, don't." Tim, taking the hint, stifled his indignation as well as he could, and suffered it to escape through his spectacles, with the additional safety valve of a short hysterical laugh now and then, which seemed to relieve him mightily. "As nobody bids me to a seat," said Ralph, looking round, "I'll take one, for I am fatigued with walking. And now, if you please, gentlemen, I wish to know, I demand to know, I have the right, what you have to say to me, which justifies such a tone as you have assumed, and that underhand interference in my affairs, which I have reason to suppose you have been practising. I tell you plainly, gentlemen, that little as I care for the opinion of the world, as the slang goes, I don't choose to submit quietly to slander and malice. Whether you suffer yourselves to be imposed upon too easily, or wilfully make yourselves parties to it, the result to me is the same. In either case you can't expect from a plain man like myself much consideration or forbearance." So coolly and deliberately was this said, that 9 men out of 10, ignorant of the circumstances, would have supposed Ralph to be really an injured man. There he sat, with folded arms, paler than usual certainly, and sufficiently ill-favoured, but quite collected, far more so than the brothers or the exasperated Tim, and ready to face out the worst. "Very well, sir," said brother Charles. "Very well. Brother Ned, will you ring the bell?" "Charles, my dear fellow, stop one instant," returned the other. "It will be better for Mr. Nickleby and for our object that he should remain silent, if he can, till we have said what we have to say. I wish him to understand that." Quite right," said brother Charles. Ralph smiled, but made no reply. The bell was rung. The room door opened. A man came in with a halting walk, and looking round, Ralph's eyes met those of Newman Noggs. From that moment his heart began to fail him. "This is a good beginning," he said bitterly. "Oh, this is a good beginning. You are candid, honest, open-hearted, fair-dealing men. I always knew the real worth of such characters as yours. To tamper with a fellow like this, who would sell his soul, if he had one, for drink, and whose every word is a lie. What men are safe if this is done? Oh, it's a good beginning." "I will speak," cried Newman, standing on tiptoe to look over Tim's head, who had interposed to prevent him. "Hallo, you sir, old Nickleby! What do you mean when you talk of a fellow like this? Who made me a fellow like this? If I would sell my soul for drink, why wasn't I a thief, swindler, housebreaker, area sneak, robber of pence out of the trays of blind men's dogs, rather than your drudge and pack-horse? If my every word was a lie, why wasn't I a pet and favourite of yours? Lie! When did I ever cringe and fawn to you? Tell me that. I served you faithfully. I did more work because I was poor, and took more hard words from you because I despised you and them, than any man you could have got from the parish workhouse. I did. I served you because I was proud, because I was a lonely man with you, and there were no other drudges to see my degradation, and because nobody knew, better than you, that I was a ruined man, that I hadn't always been what I am, and that I might have been better off, if I hadn't been a fool and fallen into the hands of you and others who were knaves. Do you deny that?" "Gently," reasoned Tim. "You said you wouldn't." "I said I wouldn't," cried Newman, thrusting him aside and moving his hand as Tim moved, so as to keep him at arm's length. "Don't tell me. Here, you Nickleby, don't pretend not to mind me. It won't do. I know better. You were talking of tampering just now. Who tampered with Yorkshire schoolmasters, and while they sent the drudge out that he shouldn't overhear, forgot that such great caution might render him suspicious, and that he might watch his master out at nights, and might set others' eyes to watch the schoolmaster? Who tampered with a selfish father, urging him to sell his daughter to old Arthur Gride, and tampered with Gride too, and did so in the little office with a closet in the room?" Ralph had put a great command upon himself, but he could not have suppressed a slight start if he had been certain to be beheaded for it the next moment. "Aha!" cried Newman. "You mind me now, do you? What first set this fag to be jealous of his master's actions, and to feel that if he hadn't crossed him when he might, he would have been as bad as he, or worse? That master's cruel treatment of his own flesh and blood, and vile designs upon a young girl who interested even his broken-down, drunken, miserable hack, and made him linger in his service in the hope of doing her some good, as thank God he had done others once or twice before, when he would otherwise have relieved his feelings by pummelling his master soundly and then going to the devil. He would, mark that, and mark this, that I'm here now because these gentlemen thought it best. When I sought them out, as I did, there was no tampering with me. I told them I wanted help to find you out, to trace you down, to go through with what I had begun, to help the right. And that when I had done it, I'd burst into your room and tell you all, face to face, man to man, and like a man. Now I've said my say, and let anybody else say theirs, and fire away." With this concluding sentiment, Newman Noggs, who had been perpetually sitting down and getting up again all through his speech, which he had delivered in a series of jerks, and who was, from the violent exercise and the excitement combined, in a state of most intense and fiery heat, became, without passing through any intermediate stage, stiff, upright, and motionless, and so remained, staring at Ralph Nickleby with all his might and main. Ralph looked at him for an instant, and for an instant only, then waved his hand, and beating the ground with his foot, said in a choking voice, "Go on, gentlemen, go on. I'm patient, you see. There's law to be had, there's law. I shall call you to an account for this. Take care what you say. I shall make you prove it." "The proof is ready," returned brother Charles, "quite ready to our hands. The man Snawley last night made a confession." "Who may the man Snawley be?" returned Ralph, "and what may his confession have to do with my affairs?" To this inquiry, put with a dogged inflexibility of manner, the old gentleman returned no answer, but went on to say that to show him how much they were in earnest, it would be necessary to tell him not only what accusations were made against him, but what proof of them they had, and how that proof had been acquired. This laying open of the whole question brought up brother Ned, Tom Linkinwater, and Newman Noggs, all three at once, who, after a vast deal of talking together and a scene of great confusion, laid before Ralph, in distinct terms, the following statement: that Newman, having been solemnly assured by one not then producible that Smike was not the son of Snawley, and this person having offered to make oath to that effect, if necessary, they had by this communication been first led to doubt the claim set up, which they would otherwise have seen no reason to dispute, supported as it was by evidence which they had no power of disproving. That, once suspecting the existence of a conspiracy, they had no difficulty in tracing back its origin to the malice of Ralph and the vindictiveness and avarice of Squeers. That, suspicion and proof being two very different things, they had been advised by a lawyer, eminent for his sagacity and acuteness in such practice, to resist the proceedings taken on the other side for the recovery of the youth as slowly and artfully as possible, and meanwhile to beset Snawley, with whom it was clear the main falsehood must rest, to lead him, if possible, into contradictory and conflicting statements, to harass him by all available means, and so to practise on his fears and regard for his own safety, as to induce him to divulge the whole scheme, and to give up his employer and whomsoever else he could implicate. That all this had been skilfully done, but that Snawley, who was well practised in the arts of low cunning and intrigue, had successfully baffled all their attempts, until an unexpected circumstance had brought him, last night, upon his knees. It thus arose. When Newman Noggs reported that Squeers was again in town, and that an interview of such secrecy had taken place between him and Ralph that he had been sent out of the house, plainly lest he should overhear a word, a watch was set upon the schoolmaster, in the hope that something might be discovered which would throw some light upon the suspected plot. It being found, however, that he held no further communication with Ralph, nor any with Snawley, and lived quite alone, they were completely at fault. The watch was withdrawn, and they would have observed his motions no longer, if it had not happened that, one night, Newman stumbled, unobserved, on him and Ralph in the street together. Following them, he discovered to his surprise that they repaired to various low lodging-houses and taverns kept by broken gamblers, to more than one of whom Ralph was known, and that they were in pursuit, so he found by inquiries when they had left, of an old woman, whose description exactly tallied with that of deaf Mrs. Sliderskew. Affairs now appearing to assume a more serious complexion, the watch was renewed with increased vigilance. An officer was procured who took up his abode in the same tavern with Squeers, and by him and Frank Cheeryble the footsteps of the unconscious schoolmaster were dogged until he was safely housed in the lodging at Lambeth. Mr. Squeers having shifted his lodging, the officer shifted his, and lying concealed in the same street, and indeed in the opposite house, soon found that Mr. Squeers and Mrs. Sliderskew were in constant communication. In this state of things Arthur Gride was appealed to. The robbery, partly owing to the inquisitiveness of the neighbours, and partly to his own grief and rage, had long ago become known, but he positively refused to give his